friends, and thanks for joining me again. And unfortunately, this is a really common problem that many people encounter. You go out and you prepare your soil and do all the hard work that takes, or you build your garden beds and then you fill them with soil, you plant all your seeds, and then you wonder why on earth these seeds didn't sprout. Well, I want to talk to you about that today so that we can offer some solutions to the different problems that can happen. So really quickly, the process of how a seed starts or seed sprouts is you usually sow it. It doesn't have to be in soil, but some kind of soil or soilless growing medium, something like that. And then, you water the plant or the seeds, and then what they do is they swell, and then they eventually sprout. So seedlings really only need two things. The seedlings need moisture and they need warmth. They don't actually need light at this stage in the process, but sometimes the light from the sun can help them to have the warmth that they need in order to sprout. So basically a seed is just sitting dormant until the right growing conditions come along for it, and then they basically sprout when it feels it's the right time. So one of the main things that most people assume when they have seeds that don't end up sprouting is that they've gotten bad seed. And usually that just means they're seeds that have died because they're no longer dormant. They're just, no longer viable at all. They're just actually dead seeds, which can be caused by a lot of different things, storing them improperly at different, temperatures and things like that. If they get too hot, that can certainly kill them. Being too old can kill them, different things like that. But honestly, this is usually not the issue, especially if you're buying seeds fresh each year, because there are actually germination requirements that a company has to prove in order for them to be able to sell their seeds. So if they don't meet these minimum, germination requirements, they can't sell them. So if they have these minimum germination requirements, if you're sowing these seeds and then you're ending up with them not sprouting, there's probably another issue involved. And so let's go ahead and talk about those different things and then the solutions to them so that we can avoid those kinds of problems. The first is going to be too cold. I mentioned that there's two main things that seedlings need, and one of them was the moisture, and then the other was the temperature. This can often happen when we sow our seeds outside early in the year. So the soil hasn't had a chance to warm up yet, and it can make it to where the seeds just don't germinate like they should. So waiting until it's the correct time of the year to plant outdoors, if you're direct sowing, or sowing them indoors where it is actually warmer and can help them to sprout, can be helpful. The second thing I mentioned was the moisture. So if you don't give them enough water, it can be hard for them to sprout. Like I said, they need to swell and then they can sprout. So this takes a fair amount of water. This is not something that you could just water them once and then wait, until next weekend and then water them again. Frequently, this can take a lot of water. Like grass seed can even benefit from being, watered 2 or even 3 times a day until it germinates. This isn't something that you have to do, long term. It's just until the seeds germinate. So they definitely do need enough water in order to germinate. The second thing that can be a problem with watering, though, is too much water. So don't go too far to the other extreme, because if your seeds are sitting in water for too long, they can actually rot instead of sprouting. The next thing that can cause problems is that they just need dark germinated. I remember back when I worked at the greenhouse that we actually had to cover some of the flats with newspaper to keep them dark enough so that they would germinate. So, there aren't very many seeds that actually need dark germinated, but I did want to throw that out there, that there are some that do need that. So that's something that you could consider, if that's an issue that you're having. The next would be that birds or other wildlife have eaten the seeds. This actually, unfortunately, happens too much. Birds will eat your grass seed. The squirrels will come along and eat your peas or your corn or whatever else. And so that can definitely keep them from germinating if they've been eaten. So, different things that you could do to help, alleviate that problem would be more mulch, or, raking your seeds into the ground a little bit better so they're, further down into the soil. That can definitely help. So just in general, keeping the wildlife from eating them is definitely going to be able to be helpful to you. And then the last thing in this section of the video anyway is going to be that there's toxins in the soil. So herbicides are designed to kill plants, grass, weeds, whatever. And so if your ground has been sprayed with that sort of stuff, or if you have a soil mixture that you've added to your raised garden beds or whatever, like killer compost. Again, I've done a video on that not long ago, or a while back actually, so you could check that out. But if you have those herbicides in your soil, it can actually kill the seeds and keep them from germinating. The next thing is going to be that the seeds actually did sprout, but then something went wrong. And this can even happen when they sprout, but then you don't actually see anything, because all of these sorts of things, most of them actually can take place while the seeds are still underneath the soil. So the first one is going to be that the seeds actually dried out and died. So this is again going to be a watering issue. If you water them and then they have a chance to dry out, and it may not even be any fault of your own if you have to work or whatever and it's a hot day, easily the seeds can dry out and die. So having mulch or things like that can definitely help keep them moist so that they have a chance to sprout. But yeah, that's definitely the first thing, is that you don't let them dry out and die. They need to stay evenly moist until they germinate. The next one is going to be another common problem that happens, unfortunately, and it's that the seeds were sowed too deep. So the seed should never be sown more than 3 times its width deep. So say you had a little pea seed, but then you pushed it like this far down into the soil. What'll happen is it'll sprout and then it'll start reaching for the soil, and then it can only go so far until it finally just can't make it to the surface, and then it dies. So definitely make sure that you're not sowing your seeds too deep. That way you don't end up with this problem. And then the next one is going to be that the frost actually killed them. This can happen with tender, young plants, or, things that are not cold hardy. Usually this is going to be more like the summer crops, the peppers, tomatoes, melons and squashes and things like that. This usually isn't a problem for the spring crops, but if you sow them and then it snows or frost comes, the tiny little seedlings that just started to sprout, even under the ground, may not have stayed warm enough, and then that frost can kill them. So making sure that you're sowing your seeds at the proper time of year, or at least offering protection if some inclement weather does come, can definitely help, alleviate this problem. And then the last portion of it is going to be when the seeds actually do sprout, but then they cause problems, which isn't technically the name of the video. It's not the premise of the whole thing, but I might as well, address it really quickly since I have a couple minutes. So the first one is going to be if the seed sprouts and then it dies or falls over. The number one thing that causes this is actually damping off, and it's a fungal disease that the plant gets usually when it's watered too often, although it can be caused by some different things in the soil too. So if your seed sprouts and then they die, not long after, watering them less often or keeping them from standing in that water can definitely help. So when the soil is like waterlogged, or it's just sitting in a lot of that water, that can definitely cause that problem, because fungus loves water. So less water is definitely the number one key to helping damping off not to be a problem. The second way to avoid damping off would be to get, or start with sterilized soil mixtures, so that that there's none of that fungal disease in there. And then if you're reusing equipment from year to year, as I frequently do, just making sure you clean it really well so that they're disinfected and that there's, nothing that can carry over from one year into the next. So, just proper watering is probably the number one thing that can help, seedlings that have recently sprouted to keep from, dying. And then the last thing is going to be fungus gnats. Fungus gnats are these tiny little black bugs that kind of look like fruit flies, but they tend to be more around the plants or around the soil of the plants. And what they do is they actually burrow down into the soil and they feed on the roots of the plants. They lay their young and then they're in there eating the, the roots and things like that. And so that can definitely kill the plants too. So, fungus gnats is a whole nother topic. Maybe we could talk about that another time, but, just again, proper watering, keeping them from being too, watered too much can definitely help. That's probably the number one thing. So there you go. Hopefully that video was helpful to you on, why your seeds didn't sprout, or if they did, how you can keep them from dying, right away. I would love to hear from you. Is this an issue you guys have? Is it, something that you have to deal with? Or do you think any of these issues might be able to help you? It's obviously a really frustrating problem, so I feel for you if it's an issue you're dealing with now. So I'm sorry. Hopefully it was helpful. So anyway, I'm Frugal Green Girl. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.